My friends, what you're about to hear isn't hype, it isn't fantasy football talk, and it isn't me trying to sell you a dream. This is a deep dive into a specific vision for how the Detroit Lions could attack the offseason, based entirely on a 7-round mock draft, with trades put together by Mike Payton from ADZ Sports. And when you really sit with it, you start to understand why this scenario hits so close to home for where this franchise actually is right now. The Lions are sitting at pick 17, and instead of locking themselves into one rigid path, the very first move in this mock is about flexibility, leverage, and understanding where Brad Holmes does his best work. Trading down with the Chargers, sliding back a few spots while picking up the 54th overall selection and only giving up late-round picks like 228 and 255 is the kind of move that reflects how this front office thinks. Those late picks are dart throws. An extra second-rounder is real currency. It's ammo. And historically, that late first-round to early second-round range is exactly where Holmes has found starters and difference makers. From there, the Lions still land a player who realistically could have been taken at 17 anyway. Caleb Lomu, the offensive tackle from Utah. This is where the logic of the move really clicks. Lomu isn't just a tackle. He's a versatile offensive lineman who can play on the left side, the right side, and even kick inside to guard if needed. That matters, because the Lions aren't just drafting for today, they're drafting for transition years. If Taylor Decker decides to stay another season, Lomu doesn't sit on the bench wasting away. He plays, he contributes, he develops. And if Decker eventually moves on, you already have a player who fits the physical and mental profile of what this offensive line has been built on. Tough, versatile, and ready to compete. This isn't about flash. It's about continuity and protection for the offense that this team runs through. Then you get into the second round, and the focus shifts to the back end of the defense. With the 47th pick, Kamari Ramsey, safety out of USC, comes into the picture, and this selection speaks directly to the uncertainty the Lions are facing at that position. Kirby Joseph dealing with injury issues, Brian Branch's timeline not being crystal clear, and a secondary that needs stability, not experiments. Ramsey is described as a fast-reacting, multi-dimensional defender. He can line up at safety, slide into the nickel, cover tight ends, and even play some linebacker-type roles in certain looks. He hits, he tackles, and he plays with aggression. That aggression can sometimes lead to him taking risky angles, but the Lions have shown they're willing to coach that up if the player brings versatility and effort. He's not being labeled as Brian Branch 2.0, but the stylistic overlap is obvious. And more importantly, he's someone who can step in and hold things together if injuries force the issue early in the season. And then the mock takes a sharp turn into bold territory. The Lions don't have a third-round pick, and that's a problem if you want to keep stacking talent. So another trade down happens, this time with the Raiders, netting picks 65 and 101 in exchange for 54. But that's not even the headline. The real shockwave is the player trade that follows, acquiring Kayvon Thibodeau, edge rusher from the New York Giants. Now, whether the Giants would actually do this is a fair debate, but strictly within this mock, the logic is clear. You're not drafting a projection. You're not hoping a rookie figures it out. You're getting a proven edge rusher still on his rookie deal, someone you know can win at the NFL level. Pairing Thibodeau with Aiden Hutchinson would instantly change how offenses have to game plan against Detroit. You're talking about pressure without blitzing, about collapsing pockets, about letting the secondary breathe. And financially, it makes sense too. He's not on a massive contract yet. You control the timeline. Extend him or treat it as a high-impact rental. Either way, the Lions finally solve a problem that has lingered far too long.
From there, the draft shifts back into trench-building mode. At pick 101, Parker Brailsford, center from Alabama, is selected as a developmental piece. This pick only truly makes sense if the Lions attack free agency for a starting center like Tyler Linderbaum, and within this mock's logic, that's exactly the assumption. Brailsford isn't coming in to start day one. He's coming in to learn, to develop, to be protected by stronger guards while refining his game. He's mobile, strong in pass protection, but inconsistent, which is exactly what you expect from a player you groom instead of rush. The bigger picture here is important. This mock envisions an offensive line that gets younger, healthier, and deeper in one offseason, something that directly addresses what went wrong when injuries hit. Later, the Lions double up on the edge position with a developmental pass rusher, a 6 feet 4 inches, 247-pound sophomore who can contribute on special teams right away while being molded defensively. With Thibodeau already in the building in this scenario, this becomes a luxury development pick, not a desperate one. Add in a tight end from Utah, Dalton Bentley, to bolster depth after injuries to Brock Wright and Sam Laporta exposed how thin that room really was, and you start to see a full picture forming. This mock isn't about headlines. It's about insulation. It's about making sure one injury doesn't derail an entire unit again. When you step back and look at this first half of the scenario, everything points to one philosophy: build the trenches, eliminate known weaknesses, and stop asking young players to do jobs they're not ready for. It's aggressive, calculated, and very on brand for how this front office has operated when it believes the window is open. Based on everything laid out so far, do you see this approach as the right balance between bold moves and long-term stability for the Lions? Or does it feel like too much risk concentrated in one off-season? Picking up exactly where this path leaves off, what really stands out is how intentional every single layer of this build becomes once you stop looking at the moves individually and start viewing them as one connected strategy. This isn't just a mock draft trying to win headlines with splashy names or trade graphics. It's a blueprint that assumes the Lions are done waiting, done patching holes temporarily, and fully committed to controlling games at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. When you add Kayvon Thibodeau into the same defensive front as Aiden Hutchinson, you're no longer talking about hoping for pressure, you're talking about dictating protection schemes. Offensive coordinators have to slide help, tight ends have to stay in, running backs have to chip. That changes everything behind them. Suddenly, a secondary that looks stressed at times doesn't have to cover for an eternity. Linebackers can play downhill. Mistakes become forced instead of hoped for. And that's where the earlier Kamari Ramsey selection becomes even more important. His versatility isn't just a bonus anymore, it's a weapon. With consistent pressure up front, a player like Ramsey can attack, read quickly, and play aggressively without constantly being put in impossible situations. The Lions wouldn't be asking him to be perfect, they'd be asking him to be decisive. That fits what this defense wants to be: physical, fast, and uncomfortable for opposing offenses. It also gives the coaching staff flexibility when injuries inevitably happen, because they always do. Instead of shuffling practice squad level players into major roles, you're inserting someone who was drafted specifically to handle chaos. On the offensive side, the vision becomes even clearer. Caleb Lamu isn't just a future starter, he's immediate insurance and long-term stability rolled into one. Whether he's lining up at tackle or sliding inside, his presence allows the Lions to manage snaps, manage health, and avoid the kind of emergency line combinations that derail seasons. Pair that with a developmental center like Parker Brailsford, assumed to be learning behind a proven veteran, and you're looking at an offensive line room that's not aging out together. It's staggered. Young players developing behind established ones, ready to step in without the entire structure collapsing. That matters more than flashy skill position additions, especially for a team whose identity is built around physicality and control. The tight end selection later in the draft reinforces that same theme. When Sam Laporta and Brock Wright were unavailable, the middle of the field suffered. That wasn't about star power, it was about functionality. A developmental tight end isn't meant to replace anyone, it's meant to ensure the offense doesn't lose entire dimensions when injuries hit. Depth stops being an afterthought and starts being part of the plan. The same logic applies to doubling up on edge rushers. Once you secure your primary solution with Thibodeau, you can afford to draft traits in upside instead of desperation. A developmental edge who contributes on special teams and flashes situational pass rush becomes a win, not a gamble. What this entire scenario ultimately says is that the Lions stop reacting and start anticipating. Instead of waiting for needs to scream at them in October, they address them in March and April. Instead of hoping rookies save them, they surround rookies with structure. Instead of overpaying in panic, they leverage draft capital and rookie contracts intelligently. This isn't about being perfect. There are risks. Trading for a proven player always carries contract and chemistry considerations. Drafting developmental linemen requires patience, but the reward is coherence. Every move points in the same direction, and that's why this mock resonates so strongly. It feels realistic in philosophy, even if specific trades are debatable. It feels like a front office that knows where it wins, knows where it's been burned, and refuses to repeat the same mistakes. It's a Lions team that says the window is open, but we're not kicking it down recklessly, we're reinforcing the frame so it stays open. Now it's on you. Do you believe this kind of aggressive, trench-focused approach is exactly what this team needs to take the next step? Or do you think the Lions should be prioritizing skill positions and future flexibility instead? There's also another layer to this approach that can't be ignored, and that's how it reshapes expectations inside the locker room. When veterans see a front office willing to trade draft capital for proven help like Thibodeau while still investing heavily in the offensive line and defensive depth, it sends a clear message. This team isn't waiting for development to magically happen, it's actively removing excuses. Competition rises immediately. Snap counts are earned. Roles are defined. That kind of environment matters when you're trying to sustain success instead of flashing for one season and fading the next. Look at how this impacts the coaching staff as well. Aaron Glenn isn't forced to scheme around a lack of pressure anymore. Ben Johnson isn't holding his breath every time the offensive line shuffles due to injury. Playbooks open up when personnel matches philosophy. You can blitz less and still affect the quarterback. You can run deeper developing routes because protection holds. You can manage games instead of chasing them. That's the real value of building this way. It's not about one superstar. It's about removing structural weaknesses that show up every January. Even the absence of a flashy early skill position pick starts to make sense in this context. This mock isn't denying talent at wide receiver or running back. It's saying those pieces function best when the foundation is stable. The offense already has its identity. The defense needs teeth. The trenches are where games are decided when the margins get thin, and that's exactly where the resources go here. You're not asking a rookie corner to cover forever. You're not asking a young quarterback to throw under constant pressure. You're setting everyone up to do their job, not someone else's. And when you zoom out even further, this approach aligns with sustainability. Rookie contracts on linemen, controlled contracts on impact defenders, depth that prevents a single injury from becoming a crisis. This is how teams stay relevant year after year instead of cycling through rebuilds. It's not glamorous, but it's honest football. It's the kind of plan that doesn't collapse the moment something goes wrong. That's why this scenario sparks real debate. Not because it's perfect, but because it forces the question Lions fans have been circling for years. Is this team ready to stop chasing potential and start demanding results? Is now the moment to be aggressive in the trenches and trust that everything else will follow? Or is there still hesitation about giving up picks, even when the return is certainty? One more thing that deserves real attention in this scenario is how it quietly removes pressure from future off-seasons. That's something fans don't always feel in the moment, but front offices absolutely do. By addressing premium positions now through a mix of draft value and controlled veteran talent, the Lions wouldn't be walking into the next offseason with panic needs. They wouldn't be staring at the edge position wondering where pressure comes from. They wouldn't be scrambling to reshuffle the offensive line because age and injuries finally caught up all at once. Instead, they'd be making optional moves, not mandatory ones, and that distinction is massive in the NFL. Think about what that means for draft flexibility a year from now. If the trenches are stabilized, future picks can be used to enhance, not rescue. You can take a skill position player because he's the best player on the board, not because you're desperate. You can trade back without fear because the roster isn't bleeding at key spots. You can even afford to let certain veterans walk if the cap math demands it, because you've already invested in replacements who understand the system and the standard. That's how real contention is sustained. There's also a psychological shift for the fan base that comes with this kind of approach. For decades, Lions fans have been conditioned to expect collapses when adversity hits. One injury turns into 3 losses. One weakness gets exposed and never corrected. This mock, as aggressive as it is, directly attacks that trauma. It says the organization sees the same problems the fans see and is willing to confront them head-on instead of hoping for internal improvement alone. That doesn't guarantee a championship, but it does rebuild trust, and trust matters when expectations rise. And make no mistake, expectations would rise fast under this scenario. A defensive front anchored by Hutchinson and Thibodeau wouldn't be judged by effort anymore, it would be judged by production. An offensive line reinforced with young, versatile talent wouldn't get excuses when protection breaks down. This roster would be built to win now, and that comes with accountability. Coaches, players, and even the front office would be operating under a clear message. The window isn't theoretical anymore, it's open, and it's being acted on. That's why this mock draft feels like more than just an exercise. It feels like a statement about identity, about choosing physical dominance over finesse, about betting on known strengths instead of chasing trends, about understanding that in the NFC, especially in cold weather and high-stakes games, the teams that last are the ones that can control the line of scrimmage when everything tightens up. At this point, what really separates this vision from so many past Lions offseason ideas is that it doesn't rely on everything going right at once. It doesn't assume perfect health. It doesn't assume every young player takes a massive leap. It's built on reducing variance. And for a franchise that has been burned over and over again by thin margins, that's not a small philosophical shift. It's a foundational one. You're not asking one rookie to save the pass rush. You're not asking one free agent to stabilize an entire unit. You're stacking solutions so that if one piece falters, the structure still holds. That's why the trade for Thibodeau is such a pivotal moment in this entire scenario. It's not just about sacks. It's about certainty. Draft picks are hope. Proven players are information. And when you already have a core in place, information becomes more valuable than hope. The Lions would know exactly what they're getting snap to snap, week to week. That allows the rest of the roster to fall into natural roles instead of being stretched beyond them. It also accelerates development for younger defenders who no longer have to be the answer before they're ready. The same logic applies to the offensive line investments. Depth there isn't sexy, but it's season-saving. Games are won and lost in December and January when bodies are worn down and injuries pile up. A roster built like this doesn't crumble under that weight. It bends, absorbs, and keeps functioning. That's how playoff teams separate themselves from talented teams that never quite get over the hump. What makes this entire approach resonate is that it feels aligned with reality. It acknowledges where the Lions are strong, where they're vulnerable, and where past seasons expose cracks that can't be ignored anymore. It doesn't promise perfection. It promises preparedness. And in the NFL, preparedness is often the difference between playing meaningful games late in the season and watching them from home. When you strip everything down to its core, what this entire scenario really challenges is the old comfort zone. The comfort of waiting, of hoping, of telling ourselves that next year development will solve what this year exposed. This path doesn't wait for permission. It accepts that the Lions are no longer building toward relevance, they're protecting relevance. That's a very different phase for a franchise, and not every organization recognizes when that shift has happened. This one assumes Detroit has, or at least should. What's fascinating is how this approach still respects the draft without worshiping it. Draft picks are used aggressively, not recklessly. They're leveraged to create balance between youth and certainty. The Lions aren't abandoning development, they're insulating it. Young players aren't being thrown into chaos and asked to grow under fire. They're being placed into an ecosystem that supports growth while still demanding results. That's how confidence is built instead of crushed. There's also an honesty here about where championships are actually decided. Not in highlight reels, not in off-season grades, but in ugly moments when the game slows down and space disappears. Third and short, goal line stands.